Welcome to the Published Author Podcast, where we help entrepreneurs learn how to write a book and leverage it to grow their business and make an impact. I'm your host, Josh Steimle. Today, my guest is Dr. Daniel Crosby. Daniel is a psychologist and behavioral finance expert who helps organizations understand the intersection of mind and markets. His first book, Personal Benchmark, Integrating Behavioral Finance and Investment Management, was a New York Times bestseller. His second book, The Laws of Wealth, was named the Best Investment Book of 2017 by the Axiom Business Book Awards and has been translated into 7 languages. His latest work, The Behavioral Investor, is a comprehensive look at the neurology, physiology, and psychology of sound financial decision-making. All things that I lack and that I need dearly. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Josh, thanks for having me.
All right. So I don't know if there are any kids who are out there who, when they're 5, 10 years old, say, when I grow up, I want to be a behavioral finance expert. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you got from where you were when you were a kid to saying, this is my thing. This is what I'm going to focus on and base my life around.
Yeah, well, I wanted to be the catcher for the Cardinals, but I couldn't hit a curveball, and so this is where I landed. So
you had to settle for being a New York Times bestselling author. That's sad.
That's correct. Yeah, it's been a rough road. So I grew up the son of a financial advisor. So insofar as someone can want to grow up to work in finance, I think I really did. Had a lot of respect for my dad, saw what he did for his clients, saw the kind of life he was able to provide for us. And so I really grew up talking about stocks, literally around the dinner table. So after my first year in college, I had a dear close friend developed an eating disorder. And so in an effort to help her, I started taking some classes in psychology and kind of became this armchair psychologist, just in sort of a very organic effort to try and help my friend, and fell in love with psychology in the process. And so really went through school with the idea to pursue a career as a therapist, really thinking that I would be a clinical psychologist. Graduated from school, went to grad school 3 days later, and indeed got a PhD in clinical psychology. But along that path, about 3 years into my clinical psychology degree, I fell out of love with it. I was taking work home with me. I was like, it was heavy all the time. I was stressed out. Like, I wasn't sure if, these clients that I loved, I would leave them on Friday and I wasn't sure I would see them next Friday, kind of thing. And so I said, I love thinking about why people do the things that they do, but I don't know if I want to do it in such a high stakes setting. And I was talking to my dad, who's, my de facto career coach at this point. And he said, well, there's a ton of psychology in markets. You should look for business applications of psychology. And at the time I was like, what are you talking about? Like I'd never considered sort of the behavioral undercurrents that are part of capital markets. But, long story short, that initial recommendation is what set me on a path to start looking into it.
What great advice.
Yeah, no, it was great advice. It was really great advice. And I'm so grateful for where it landed me.
So you looked into it, and then which path did you, obviously you went down the financial path, but how did that happen?
Yeah. So out of grad school, I knew I had to sort of, blaze my own trail. This is, like you said, not a job there's a lot of. And so I got a gig at a large bank here in the Southeast. I'm from Alabama originally. So I got a job here with a large bank in the Southeast doing pre-employment vetting of executives. So like before they would hire a banker and pay them big bucks, they would bring 27-year-old me on to give them an IQ test and a personality test and sort of a battery of assessments to see if they were a good fit for the organization. And I loved that work. And it was within the bank that I discovered what I now know as behavioral finance and behavioral economics, sort of the application of psychology to financial decision making. And what I found was there was no one out there doing this for people like my dad, who are successful folks in mid-tier markets. There were people who had won Nobel Prizes for their writing and thinking about behavioral finance, but there was no one who was taking it and translating it into the language of everyday financial professionals, like my dad in middle America, who could benefit from these insights and were never going to read the academic journals where they were found. So I sort of became this intermediary, the person who would take these complicated academic ideas and translate them into Alabama speak, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's a difference. In fact, I think they're totally different. The difference between behavioral finance and behavioral economics. I mean, these sound like they should be related, but really these are totally separate things, right?
Well, behavioral finance is sort of a specific case of behavioral economics. Like behavioral economics could deal with anything from how we make decisions about what we put in our body, like food and things like that, to exercise, to public policy, to politics. And behavioral finance is the very specific application of psychology to the stock market, if you will. So it's sort of a special case of the broader discipline.
Okay, so there is a connection there. I was just thinking about Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. I love that book, and he talks about how he's a behavioral economist, and it's like, wait, you're not an economist, but it's using economics in a different term. But in your sense, it really is the financial stuff too. So
yeah, it really is with me.
Now, you did your PhD at Emory, right?
I did my PhD at Brigham Young University and my postdoc at Emory.
Okay, gotcha. So now, when you were doing your PhD at BYU and then the postdoc at Emory, was this before the part where you said, "This is not what I want to do"?
No, it was right at the part. So, in completion of a PhD, you have to do thousands of hours of client work. And so I knew, year 3 of a 5-year program that this is not what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted the letters after my name. I knew that would open doors for me. And so I specifically pursued Emory because it had business applications. It had a top 20 business school. It's funded by Koch money. It's in a big city with lots of Fortune 500 institutions. And I knew that it would give me opportunities to work with businesses. So my decision to go to Emory was very calculated because I knew it would give me good non-clinical business exposure.
Okay, great. So that pivot happened during that PhD journey.
Yep.
So then you get your PhD, you graduate, and you're working. What was your first job out of university after your postdoc?
Yeah, so it was that job at the bank doing these pre-employment assessments of the executives. So it was really hilarious because I was young. I was like 27, 28, and you're sitting down with these folks who are making 7 figures a year, and you're the gatekeeper for whether or not they get a job. So it was a very strange position to be in, but it was really rewarding work. It's work that I believe in, helping ensure that people are a good cultural and a good organizational fit, I think is important work. And I haven't done it in a long time, but I do think it's important work.
Okay. So in between that job and then writing your first book, what's kind of the work history in between?
So I lasted about 18 months in that first job. So I was I was and am entrepreneurially minded, and I didn't love sort of the top-down structure of that job, and felt that there was room to run for me in this sort of like applied behavioral finance for the masses. And so I broke out on my own after just 18 months. So I was just, I would have been 29 at the time when I went out on my own. And that's when I started to need to market myself, and so I did things like, I know it's still kind of big, but it was very big at the time. The TEDx events were very big. And so that's where I went, and I was looking for anything to market myself. And I found that organizations were always looking for public speakers. Like, it's something that no one likes to do. And if you have, something interesting to say, people are sort of intrigued by human behavior and human nature. And so it was easy for me to go speak whatever at the local Rotary Club or, whatever local business organization. And that's where I was out on my own. It was the throes of the Great Recession. And I'm like looking for ways to get my name out there. And so I landed a speaking gig at a TEDx in my hometown. And from there, got a little, that first TEDx talk blew up is too strong a word, but it did well. Like it did well. And that was what led me to say, hey, I should write a book based on the concepts from this first TEDx talk. So that's kind of the next transition, I guess, in my professional history.
Okay. Now, did you have any writing experience? What made you think, hey, I can write a book about this?
Well, hubris, like arrogance, being young. I don't know. Like, no, I mean, I had written a dissertation, right? So, but that's a very, very different animal. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
but it is a lot of writing.
It is a lot of writing. So you develop the discipline of writing, but it's very heady, it's very cerebral, and it's not very readable. In fact, when I get quarterly updates about how many people have read my dissertation, it's just like the saddest thing. I mean, I think it's like all time been read by 25 people or something. But it's a very different enterprise. So in some respects, I had the discipline, but in other respects, I had no business writing a book. I had certainly had no formal training in it and no expertise there.
But you knew you were onto a hot idea or an idea that had piqued some people's attention, and you wanted to get that out there in that form.
That's right.
So what did it look like writing the first book? What was your process? How did you get started? And take us through that journey.
Yeah. So I was lucky to have built somewhat of sort of an intellectual scaffolding based on this TEDx talk. The name of the TEDx talk was "You're Not That Great." And it was sort of these seven counterintuitive truths for living a good life, and talking about the ways in which sort of recognizing and owning our own mediocrity could be empowering in a counterintuitive way. And so I said, well, this is the framework then. Like, here's the seven concepts I'm going to write about. I'll have a little intro, a little outro, have these seven concepts. And so that will be the process. So that was really it. Was like, here's my seven pillars. Now let me work backwards from there and begin to research them out. TED Talks are like 15 minutes long. There's not a lot of meat on that bone. So it was really just me working backwards from those seven pillars to try and fill in more anecdotes, more research, more stories around those seven counterintuitive truths.
And now this is the book that became the New York Times bestseller, right?
This is not.
This is not.
So this one was self-published. So I don't know. I have sort of a funny history. So I had one self-published book. I had 3 books published by major publishers. And then I had one children's book, which is quite odd, that got picked up and did well on Kickstarter. And so we just got that one published after sort of a successful Kickstarter campaign. So in my professional bio, when I say my first book, it's really my second book, but my first kind of like big boy publisher book.
Yeah. Okay. So this first book that you self-published, did you try to go after a traditional publisher, or did you just figure, hey, it's going to be easier to self-publish, I'll just do that?
I did, but not very hard. So I did, but in a very like ham-handed way, in not a very methodical way. I was sort of spraying and praying submissions to whoever, didn't really give it a whole lot of thought, was impatient. And sort of wanted to capitalize on the the sort of the current of the talk itself and the accompanying video, and so tried a bit, but not very hard, and it's certainly not in a very smart or methodical way. Looking back now.
Mm-hmm. So, what were the results from that book once you published it? Did people gobble it up? Did people know about it? How did you promote it? What happened?
Yeah, I mean, I promoted it. I promoted it at speaking engagements. I promoted it at speaking engagements on social media. I've been active on Twitter and LinkedIn for quite a while. And so, I mean, it did okay. Like, I mean, it did probably better than most self-published books, which is a low bar, right? But it did poorly enough that it made me want to go seek out an established publisher the second time. I have friends who've had great success with self-publishing, but they all have really robust platforms. They all have sort of a direct to consumer pipeline that I did not have at 29 years of age and 6 months of self-employment.
Hmm. So then where did the idea for the second/first published book come from? What was it that made you say, okay, I'm going to do this book and I'm going to go after a traditional publisher?
Yeah, so at this point, it's a few years down the line. My career has gained some focus. I've gone from sort of the broader field of business psychology and organizational behavior into the very specific field of behavioral finance. So that was one sort of uh, precipitating event, was that I had really narrowed my career focus, and I think that helped a whole lot. The second thing that had helped is I had done my platform had improved. I had a stronger social media presence. I had a better email list. I was speaking at the time probably 50, 60 times a year at industry functions. And so at this point, I had a little bit of a name for myself in this tiny little, a big fish in the very small pond of behavioral finance. And so I was actually sought out at that point by publishers, by publishers who said, "Look, there's enthusiasm for books in this space. Would you write one?" And so I was sought out by a couple of publishers who asked to work with me. And
That's pretty sweet.
yeah, it was sweet. That's why I'm kind of a useless guest. I mean, it's like I just I stumbled onto some of this stuff, but that
No, I mean,
specialization.
this is a great path for people to follow. You just get a PhD, and then you give a viral TEDx talk, and then you happen to focus on something that's going to be hot a few years from now. I mean, we can all follow that path.
Well, but I'll tell you though, I mean, the specialization helped a ton, and the fact that it was an emerging field helped a ton. I mean, because my first book would have probably been categorized as, broadly like a leadership book. And, I mean, if you're writing a leadership book, like, get in line. I mean, it's like you're behind every other person who thinks they've cracked the code of how to lead an organization. And so when I specialized, it was a very, very different experience. And so I actually had my pick. I had my pick of a couple of publishers to write that second book first with a major publisher.
So, how did you decide which one you wanted to go with?
Money. So money. I mean, really, the deals were very similar. Money was the big differentiator. I learned a lot about how little even a big publisher will do to promote a book, to really help you. I mean, I'm not writing YA vampire romance novels, right? So it's not going to be like the best-selling book in their catalog. And so, they kind of give you the minimum viable assistance, and they really set the expectation, even with a large publisher, that you're going to have to do a lot of this yourself. So, seeing that the offers were otherwise fairly identical, I went with the money.
Mm-hmm. So that book comes out now. Was this a deal for just the one book, or did they do what some publishers do and say, "Hey, we want rights to the next 3 books you write"?
So they wanted first right of refusal. So they had first right of refusal for a second book, but it wasn't like a 3-book deal.
Got it. So that book comes out, and then tell us the New York Times bestseller story. Like, how did this happen?
Well, it happened by having a co-author who was extremely popular and well resourced. So I co-authored the book with my boss, who was the head of a large asset manager, and we had PR. We had every advantage. I mean, we had PR. We had an entire marketing squad. We had a social media squad. We had people doing trailers for the books. We had people lining up media tours in New York and Boston, and I mean, we just like it was candidly, again, this, I'm the worst guest of all time, through no genius of my own, through no genius of my own. It was just a good setup because I co-authored the book with someone who was in a place to make sure that it got in front of readers.
This is great information because people need to know what the reality is. I was just talking with a potential coaching client. She was asking, so can my book become a New York Times bestseller? And I was just straight with her. I just said, it's really hard. It's really tough. Like, it's not realistic for the vast majority of people out there. And you have to put so much into it. It's not like you just write a great book, and if it's a great book, it becomes a New York Times bestseller. So I'm glad to get this perspective from you on what it took to push your book up to that level.
Yeah, I mean, it took an enormous amount of coordination and effort and money, frankly, to get it out there. And even then, we just barely scraped by, and not for long, right? But I mean, we had things like we were going to conferences with thousands of people in attendance, and they would pre-buy the book for all the attendees. I mean, it's really those bulk purchases and that sort of coordinated effort that makes it possible. It's enormously hard to do on kind of a onesie twosie book sale basis, especially I think in certain disciplines like behavioral finance.
Yeah. Well, that makes it all the more impressive.
Mm-hmm.
So you have that first book. And what does this do for your career when it hits this level? Because you said you're the co-author on it, but still you're the co-author on it. So what impact did you see on your career and opportunities coming to you as a result of this book that was getting a lot of press and attention?
Yeah, I mean, it's incalculable, the good that it did for my career. And again, I'm in my early 30s at this point, and it opened every door for me. Because nobody's, hiring 32-year-olds from the deep South to come speak at their event without some sort of a calling card. And so it becomes your calling card. It becomes the legitimizer. It becomes the reason that, industry newspapers and publications begin to reach out to you for comment. And I mean, really, for years after that, for many years after that, I coasted on the success of that and other books, just doing speaking gigs. I mean, that was a full-time job to speak and promote those books. And it was, sort of a wonderful whirlwind, but I couldn't overstate how much good it did for my career. It absolutely put me on the map. And I to this day, that I think for a lot of people in niche fields like me, I think that's sort of the usefulness of writing a book. Because you're not, even those books of mine that have done well, they're not big money makers relative to other things that you can do on the back of the book.
Yeah, you're not making the money from the book sales themselves. You're making the money from the sales that come because people read the book, right?
That's exactly right.
So what was it that then inspired you to say, okay, I need to write another book? What was the motivation or inspiration for that?
Well, it was really two things. One was wanting to prove that I could do it on my own, right? So I had a very well-resourced co-author on the first one. So in the second one, I wanted to sort of prove to myself that it wasn't a fluke. Like, I wanted to prove to myself that I could write this, and I wanted to write it for people like my wife. I wanted to write a book for people like my wife who are not financial professionals, but still need good insights into like how to make great financial decisions. So my second big publisher book was called The Laws of Wealth, and it was just sort of a distillation of, it was sort of a This I Believe, right? If you ever listen to that series on NPR, I mean, it's sort
Yeah.
of like this I believe about financial markets for the everyman and the everywoman, and I wanted to do it on my own.
Yeah. And The Laws of Wealth, I have to say, that's a little bit more approachable title than Personal Benchmark Integrating Behavioral Finance and Investment Management.
Well, you said it, right? I mean, the first one was very industry focused, and my latest book, candidly, was very industry focused, and that has its place. But I wanted my wife and kids and friends to have a book that they could read, and that could influence their financial decisions in a very in a very everyday sort of way.
So, having written that industry focused book and then this more general audience focused book, what kind of difference did you see in the type of attention you got or the results that you got between those books?
Well, it's interesting. So the Laws of Wealth has had a much broader international reach, right? So my two most recent books have been translated into 7 languages apiece, and that's been the most fun of the whole process to me. Is getting a letter from someone in Germany who read my book in German and saying they appreciated it. And it helps that every time I land a foreign rights deal, my family goes out to eat at the type of cuisine that we go get German food when we land the German book deal. And that's a lot of fun. But it's really, really rewarding to me to know that my book's being read in Vietnam and Germany and India and wherever else. So that's super rewarding to me, and that's been some of the positive fallout from writing a more a more sort of consumer focused book.
Now, tell us, how do these international deals come about? I think a lot of people would assume, oh, the publisher that published your book, they just go and they print it in these other languages and ship it over there.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? So with the last 2 books where I have gotten a number of international deals, my publisher coordinates with publishers and distributors in foreign markets for those foreign rights deals, and each one of those contracts looks different, right? Because it gets priced differently, the structure's different, the advance is different, the rev share is different, and in some places, candidly, it's terrible, right? I'm like, because I mean, in certain developing markets, a book is going to sell for 250 US, and so then your cut of it is whatever 50 cents. And so the deals aren't always lucrative, but they were, in every case, they were negotiated through my original publisher, who took the book to markets and conferences and used their contacts and their list to try and score those foreign rights deals.
And this is where I think there's a big difference between self-publishing and traditional publishing, because a lot of people ask, like, what do I get from a traditional publisher if they don't do the marketing and I can go get it printed through Amazon or Ingram Spark or anything? Well, why am I going with a traditional publisher? And this is one of those examples that people are not going to translate this on their own and get it distributed in other countries on their own. That's something traditional publishers have some expertise in. That, I mean, where would we get started doing that on our own, right?
Right. I mean, where are you and I going to go negotiate with India and South Africa and Vietnam and all these places where I've gotten book deals? That's one thing. And these they're just set up for it too. Like the paperback edition of the Laws of Wealth, just the second edition paperback edition just dropped yesterday, actually, and the sales have been great because they have a distribution list of tens and tens of thousands of people who are interested in reading behavioral finance books, and I don't have that. So again, like if you have the right platform, I think you can make self-publishing work better, but I still think it's tricky when it comes to stuff like international deals.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So that's the Laws of Wealth. And then Behavioral Investor, you were saying that was a bit more industry focused, right?
Yeah, Behavioral Investor, I wrote, I wish I had a better reason. It's, I was just, I'm too nerdy. Like I had more that I wanted to say that wasn't retail focused, that wasn't consumer focused. And I was like, look, I can't help it. I want to cite all these crazy esoteric studies, and I want to talk to people who can speak the language. And if it hurts sales, it hurts sales. But it turned out fine. But yeah, I had to go back to my industry focus, and that one was a lot of fun. It was kind of looking at, I saw a gap in the literature, right? I saw a gap in the literature about folks not considering sort of the environmental and sociological and other considerations that go into financial decision making. And I wanted to write a wonky esoteric book about that, and I did.
Congratulations. So now children's books are not the focus of this podcast so much, but I want to hear about this. Like, what's the story behind the children's book?
Oh, I really am going to be your worst guest. So I wrote a poem. So I have three young kids. And when it comes to talking to them about certain topics, I have taken to writing poetry about them. And this sounds weird. So I write these poems that makes it just a little bit easier for them to understand it. And so we had a sort of a distant friend of the family die. And the kids had questions. They're very young at the time. And so I wrote a poem sort of in the style of Shel Silverstein, and it was called "Everyone You Love Will Die." And so,
that's a pleasant message.
Yes,
it goes along with a lot of like those 18th century nursery rhymes, though, right?
Yeah, no, it's kind of has that vibe. But the gist of it was kind of memento mori, right? Like where the closing stanzas, yes, everyone you love will die, but you're here today, and so am I. I mean, it was just kind of this message to my kids, like, look, we don't know how long we're gonna get. Let's make the most of every day. Let's love each other like crazy and love the people around us. And so I wrote this book. I was on Facebook at the time. I have since quit, thank goodness. But, I was on Facebook at the time. I posted it on Facebook and was just like, hey, I wrote this funny poem, haha. And so my friend, who's a talented artist, says, I was really touched by your poem, and I illustrated it. And so she had done all of these illustrations to go along with it, and they were beautiful. And they were really kind of these simple pen and ink, sort of like Shel Silverstein-esque drawings. And I said, this is crazy. These are beautiful. And I said, you know what? Let's make this a book. Let's just give it a shot. And so I said, let's just like make this a PDF. We're going to put it on Kickstarter, and we're going to see what happens. Well, Kickstarter made it their top pick of the day, made it their like editor's pick of the day. And we met our funding goal, which was admittedly very small. I mean, it was just to get a few hundred copies printed for friends and family and people who had pre-ordered it. But Kickstarter, made it their pick of the day, and it got funded in like 12 hours. And then the local newspaper did a story on it and all this stuff. And so then it was like, that was enough. We were like, haha, like, this is never gonna do anything. No one's ever gonna buy a book called "Everyone You Love Will Die." So we didn't do anything with it. But the publisher of my other books contacted me about a year and a half ago and was like, "Hey, it's a good book. Like, let us bring it to life."
They did children's books too.
They don't do children's books. They just did me a favor. They do investing. They do investing books. So, but so they said, hey, like, what the heck? We'll help you get it where it belongs. And, it's not like they've done any massive promotion of it or anything, but they've said, hey, like, let us help you get it on Amazon and let us help you get it set up. So that's how I came to write a self-published book, 3 business books, and a book called "Everyone You Love Will Die."
All right. I'll be looking forward to the behavioral investor children's book edition.
I should. That's a great idea, actually.
Turn that into a board book for toddlers and stuff.
A pop-up. Yeah, I love it.
By the way, what did the Kickstarter get to?
Oh, not much. $6,000 or $7,000. I mean, it was just was truly just to print a couple hundred copies and give them to sort of interested folks. But it for a Facebook poem to turn into something was a pretty fun series of events.
That is cool. So the actual published version of that book, though, is now available for sale, or it's there, Amazon, everything?
Yeah, it's
cool.
there.
Well, I'm going to go buy a copy. I love that title. That's great. My dad's always talking about how everybody needs to prepare to die. He's really big into preparing, like helping people prepare for death and like taking that seriously. So I'll have to send him a copy of that as well. Sounds like
I've got my whole funeral planned out, man. I got the hymns picked out. I got everything. My wife knows. I want it to be good.
Fancy coffin, lots of jewels.
No, like southern guy coffin, like, old, just a pine box, just like a simple pine box, but very dramatic weeping and wailing though. We need big demonstrative weeping and wailing. Simple coffin though.
Awesome. Yeah, I think at my funeral, I'd like to have that kind of coffin and then have like somebody like tip it over or something and I come like flopping out. That'd be great.
I love it.
All right. So you can't have written this many books without thinking there might be another one in store. I mean, do you have other ideas for other books that you're going to do in the future?
Yeah. So I am kind of taking notes on a book. I don't know how else to put it, on like the meaning of life. Like I'm big into French, like existentialism and philosophy and just like helping people find their why. So it will be a book on helping people find their why. And just, that's one of those things that I think everyone's interested in. And we talk about it in sort of big, grandiose, abstract terms, but we don't always concretize it in a way that people can take it and run with it. So I want to write a sort of a practical book for a very impractical endeavor. And I'm not rushing it though. Like I feel like it's going to kind of be my magnum opus, and I'm trying to like let it. Every other book I've written, or at least the three sort of main ones, have been written for a very specific professional purpose. Like it was very calculated. Like this is gonna, like I'm gonna write this, and then I'm gonna raise my speaking fees. Like I'm gonna write this, and it's gonna get me a job or whatever. And this is kind of my life's work, and so I'm taking my time with this one.
Got it. So as far as work goes, what are you actually doing these days for work? I mean, are you making money off the books and the speaking circuit, or what have you got going on?
Yeah, I'm actually an executive at a financial technology firm. So I'm the chief behavioral officer at Orion Advisor Solutions, and so we build financial technology primarily for financial advisors who then, of course, use it with in clients. But basically, what I do is help them build technology in a way that helps folks make great decisions and is user friendly. And in addition to that, still do a lot of writing and speaking and PR and things like that. So it's about half. It's about half kind of baking good decision-making processes into tech flow, and about half being a public spokesperson for the organization and still doing speaking and thought leadership and things like that.
So were you a co-founder or founder there, or was it more of a traditional hiring situation?
So we were acquired actually. So I worked for a $25 billion asset manager in Philly doing more or less the same thing. And we were acquired. But so the answer is it was a traditional hire originally though.
Got it. So were they pretty happy to acquire somebody that's got all this writing experience and books and personal brand out there?
Yeah, they actually were, because they are this absolute juggernaut of a company, a multi-billion-dollar financial technology juggernaut doing great things, reputation second to none, but they really didn't have, sort of a face of the brand, if you will. I mean, there were a lot of great people doing great work, but there was no one there outside of the very top leadership that had sort of a writing, speaking, thought leadership pedigree. And so I maybe I'm patting my own back, but I do think they were excited about that. And I think is a lesson to your listeners, right? I mean, this can turn into a job. I'll never have to submit a resume ever again because my books are my resume now, right? Like that's sort of the calling card. That's your reputation is what you've written down.
Yeah, I think that is a valuable lesson because you can take that with you. I mean, you can get all sorts of work experience and knowledge, but then you have to convince somebody that you have it, and you have to have that resume or your LinkedIn profile. But when you have the book, it's just assumed, well, hey, he wrote the book on this topic. He must be the expert on this topic.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Well, this has been great, Daniel, to get all these details from you. Far from being the worst guest ever on this show, I think this has been one of the best episodes. It's been super interesting and unique. And there are lots of great lessons here that I think any entrepreneur can take away as they're working on their book. If somebody wants to connect with you, where's the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, I have my own podcast called Standard Deviations. I'm on Twitter at Daniel Crosby and Daniel Crosby, PhD on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Thanks so much for being with us here today.
Thank you, Josh. It was fun.
All right. That's it. That's the cut right there. So
love it.
That was awesome. Yeah,
Thank
we
you.
could have dug more into your podcast too, I suppose, but
it's fine. Yeah, it's fine. Podcasts is how I've sold books though. That's one thing. That's like definitely how I've sold books.
Really? Tell me more about that, because that's definitely something that a lot of our audience is interested in doing as well, is how do I build other parts of my thought leadership system, and how, should I do a podcast? Is a podcast even going to be beneficial? So how has the podcast helped you with the author side of things?
Oh, doing other people's podcasts is how I've sold books.
Gotcha. Okay.
I mean, my podcast probably helps at the margins, but yeah, doing other people's podcasts has been, I mean, I've been relentless in appearing on, like, because again, in financial services, there's whatever 30, 40 like good sort of reputable podcasts, and you just get on all of them. And soon, I mean, soon you've reached the entire, soon you've basically reached your entire buying audience. So
perfect. Cool. Well, I'm glad I didn't stop the recording there. Now we could just edit that and stick that in somewhere too. So
there you go. Perfect. There you go. Perfect.
Hey, so it's going to be a few weeks before we get this edited and out there. We have a backlog in our queue right now, but we're doing 12 a month. So it'll get out there pretty quick. But it'll be a few. Month? Yeah.
Whoa.
I'm kind of addicted to this. Like, I love doing it. And so I'm like, man, I thought about doing like an episode a day type thing. And I have to restrain myself because I love talking to authors.
What's your game plan with the podcast?
So I have this published author program where we help entrepreneurs to write and publish their books. And we have 4 different offerings there. So we have like a masterclass that's $40 a month. We have a mastermind that's small group coaching that's $400 a month. And then we have like this book in a box thing that's $40,000, where we interview people and turn the interview into a book. Yep. And we do literally everything for them. And then we have like elite ghostwriting stuff where we're bringing in like a New York Times bestselling ghostwriter. And we also literally do everything, but it's like, we'll get them on the Wall Street Journal, USA Today bestseller list, like, and they're paying a couple $100,000 for that. So that's like, that's for the guy who started like $100 million company and sold it and is like, all right, I want my book out there and I want everything, but I don't actually want to write it. Like, we'll take care of everything for them. That's awesome. The podcast is a way to promote those programs, but it's also just a way for me to talk to people that I love talking to, because I love talking to authors and I love learning just everybody's backgrounds and how they do what they do. So even like the behavioral finance stuff, to me, I'm like, this is interesting. Like, we could just talk about that all day. Sure. I've got to talk about the book, but I get into the details of it too. So it's a lot of fun for me.
Yeah. I keep telling my wife, if I could ever turn my podcast into my whole job, I would love it. Like, I mean,
you can do it from anywhere. You go live in Europe for a few years and do it. And yeah, I have a sponsorship, which has been awesome, but like I love it. It's been so much fun for me.
Yeah, no, it is fun. Like I'm even kind of antisocial, but like once I get on these interviews, I'm like, this is so fun. Like I never want it to end. Like, let's just keep on talking. But
that's awesome.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Well, I'm so glad that we connected and look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Josh. Thanks. Great being here. Thank you again.
Yep. Thanks, Daniel. We'll talk soon.
Bye.
Bye. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to spread the word, please give us a 5-star rating review and tell your friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else you listen to podcasts. And if you're an entrepreneur interested in writing and publishing a nonfiction book to grow your business and make an impact, visit publishedauthor.com for show notes for this podcast and other free resources.